CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Robin Dwyer.
And I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories. A multi-million-dollar support package for Chinese-owned British steel, but only to fund a transition to a greener future.
Rivaling the US dollar, Brazil's President Lula holds talks in Argentina about a new Latin American currency.
Motive for a massacre. California police identify the gunman behind the Lunar New Year mass shooting, but say they don't yet know why he did it.
EU ministers approve a new multi-million-dollar support package for Ukraine, but talks are dominated by whether to send tanks to Kyiv.
2078, the solar helium flash crisis.
And their next mission. Can the sequel live up to the original at the box office as the Wandering Earth heroes return?
The UK government is poised to give a $350 million support package to the Chinese-owned steelmaker British Steel.
But the funding is dependent on the owner, Jingye, securing jobs and investing substantially in green technology at the group's 2 sites here in the UK. The steel industry is one of the most difficult to decarbonise because of the huge amounts of energy needed for production.
Jingye and British Steel's other owner, India's Tata Steel, are looking at a range of alternatives to the traditional coal-fired blast furnaces. Well, our correspondent Andrew Wilson has been following this story. So, Andrew, what's in the government's offer?
Well, this is the brainchild coming from Grant Shapps, the big business secretary, Michael Gove, the levelling up secretary, persuading the Chancellor he needs to put a bit more money into British Steel. The 2 plants that they're focusing on are up northeast. Scunthorpe, that's the Jingye-owned plant for British Steel, and the other is Tata Steel down at Port Talbot in Wales. Both of those are producing an awful lot of carbon emissions. It's the most energy-intensive production process left on the planet, but we all need our steel. So the taster is to give them a bit of money. They're both plants crying out for support from the government because they're struggling to turn a profit at the moment. But in return, they want to change their coke fired foundries into something greener. Difficult, but not impossible. 2 options. One is hydrogen, but hydrogen itself uses a lot of energy to be produced because it needs to be produced by power stations as well. So renewable hydrogen, green hydrogen, so-called green hydrogen, is out there, but there's not much of it about at the moment. The other option is electric arc furnaces powered by renewables. Again, a bit of a stretch given the infrastructure in the UK, but those are the 2 things they're looking for. The problem is both steel organisations are saying we're going to need a lot more than $350 million each to make this kind of technological turnaround. We estimate we're going to need a couple of billion. The government is saying this will get you started, but we want you to start investing some of your own money and start turning a profit. So it's an impasse. It's all about the government's net zero commitments to bring down the emissions in time for 2030 and then 2050, and also to keep the steel industry alive because it employs so many people up and down the country. 20,000 from the Wales plant, and Jingye employing something like 4,000 up in the northeast.
And bigger picture, Andrew, how difficult are things for the UK steel sector generally at the moment?
I think it's how difficult are things for the steel sector around the world. Everyone's using lots of steel. They all need it. The Americans are trying to decarbonise their steel industry. The Chinese are starting to try and decarbonise theirs. European Union has similar plans. The UK falling behind a bit. It's a big employer, but it's a competitive industry. And the subsidies that used, particularly by China and in the US, are undercutting some of the production in the European Union and the UK. So the unions are arguing that their steel industry is being made uncompetitive because the government is supporting it enough, and that the cheap imports are undercutting the business. So that's yet to be resolved. But the other and the overwhelming problem, to consider this, that the Port Talbot plant, the one plant in Wales, contributes 2% of all UK carbon emissions into the atmosphere every year. It is a dirty industry. Worldwide, if you look at the figures in a certain way, you've got the 2 biggest polluters, China and the United States. The 3rd biggest polluter is the steel sector, beyond any other kind of country. So this is really something that needs looking at, and of course as a business proposition, because it's so expensive to create the kind of heat you need to make steel using renewables, it's something of a quandary, and everyone is turning their minds to it, and the UK seems to be a bit slow off the mark on that one.
Andrew Wilson, thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrew. Next, Brazil and Argentina are to start preparing for a new Latin American currency in a bid to rival the dollar. The plans are due to be discussed by Brazil's President Lula da Silva as he visits Argentina on his first trip abroad since returning to office.
He'll be attending a summit of the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, which was set up in 2011 to coordinate the region away from US influence. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Joel Richards, who's in Buenos Aires. So, Joel, how significant could this new currency be, and will it ever happen?
It could be a major development. That is the question. Will it ever happen? Lula da Silva, as you mentioned, is on his first presidential trip since taking office 3 weeks ago. He's meeting, as we speak, with Argentine President Alberto Fernandez. They've already announced that they will move forward with this project that they've called Sur, which means south in Spanish, and it would be a major development. Argentina and Brazil are the two largest economies in the region, and if it were to happen, it would be the second largest currency bloc outside or after the euro. But as we said, the question is whether or not it will happen. The reason makes perfect sense. It would enable Brazil and Argentina to bypass the US dollar for their international trade, which currently stands at around $26 billion annually. So that's very attractive. Just consider Argentina, whose major economic difficulties and problems really revolve around the shortage of dollars. So if it is not forced to use the dollar to trade with its main trade partner, then that is, of course, beneficial. And the idea is that this would also help regional integration. You mentioned the CELAC, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean states, meeting here tomorrow on Tuesday in Buenos Aires. Well, they'll be offered the opportunity to join this project as well. But again, the question is whether or not this will move forward. Just consider these trade imbalances, the economic imbalances that Argentina has, for example, and then also consider that the euro, which is of course the main currency bloc, took over 3 decades to launch after it was first proposed. So it's unlikely we're going to see banknotes with Sur written on them being traded on the streets of Buenos Aires or Sao Paulo anytime soon.
Joel, thank you very much. Our correspondent Joel Richards in Buenos Aires.
Some other news in brief. Millions of Chinese players of the video game World of Warcraft are about to say goodbye to the role-playing game. It's one of several that are about to go offline after a dispute between US games developer Blizzard and Chinese internet provider NetEase. It comes after the American company made a surprise announcement that it would end its 14-year-old partnership with NetEase late last year.
A new subway line has opened in Turkey, connecting Istanbul's international airport to the centre of the city. It will cut travel time on the 34-kilometre route to just 24 minutes. The line uses fully automated driverless trains made in China, which are capable of travelling at up to 120 kilometres an hour.
Music streaming giant Spotify is to cut 6% of its total workforce, around 600 jobs. The company's CEO says revenue growth has slowed, falling well behind its investment levels. Spotify has never posted a full-year profit despite its success in the online music market. Shares in the Swedish-based company rose nearly 5% on the news.
Police are still trying to establish a motive for a mass shooting in California, which saw a 72-year-old man kill 10 people and then turn the gun on himself.
The gunman has been identified as Hu Can Tran. He opened fire at a Lunar New Year party in a dance studio in the Asian-majority community of Monterey Park. He then took his own life when approached by the police. The shooting is the deadliest in the United States since 21 people were killed in a school in Texas in May last year. And our correspondent Dan Williams is live in Los Angeles for us now. So what's the latest on the investigation, Dan?
Yeah, certainly that investigation is continuing, and as you say, really focusing in on the motive as to what sparked this attack. There is a certain sense of relief, it has to be said, that this gunman is no longer a threat, but we're also hearing as well a lot more detail in terms of the victims. We now have the first 2 names of the victims from this attack. Mai Nan, which is a 65-year-old woman, and Lilan Lee, a 63-year-old woman. Now, as I say, the key focus will, of course, now be on getting clarity around the motive of this attack, as this community is reeling still following what events took place here. It is still unclear, it has to be said, as to what prompted this, and certainly the authorities at their news conference late last night, when they revealed the suspect's name, they were very keen not to speculate any more than what has been, in the various reports following this attack. Now, those reports have focused on, at first, whether this was an anti-Asian hate crime. That was the first element, and a lot of stories focusing around that. That has since moved to potentially whether it was more of a domestic incident. Certainly the mayor of this region saying that was the information that he had been receiving. But we should hopefully get further clarity from a news conference a little later today. As I say, the real element here is that this is a community still trying to come to terms with the events that happened here on Saturday night. There were 100,000 people on the streets on Saturday night enjoying the Lunar New Year celebrations. There are events on Sunday where a further 100,000 people were expected. Those were all cancelled. And of course, still many of the victims still in hospital here as well. So certainly this is a community still in shock following Saturday's events.
Just an awful tragedy, and this the at least 33rd mass shooting in the US this year already. Dan Williams in LA, in California. Thank you very much.
Still to come here on CGTN. As China's blockbuster sequel, Wandering Earth 2, hits screens in the UK and China at the same time, we look at the year's big cinema success stories.
Roger, make you loud and clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy idea.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Oh,
we hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
And welcome back. Remember, CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online, on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
EU foreign ministers meeting in Brussels have approved plans for more military aid to Ukraine.
The $500 million package is the 7th agreed since the conflict broke out almost a year ago. It includes funding for so-called non-lethal equipment for Ukraine's military. But there is still no word on whether Germany will send its Leopard 2 tanks to Kiev, with signs that Poland may decide to send them anyway as part of a breakaway coalition.
Let's talk to our correspondent, Rosie Burchard, who's in Brussels. So, Rosie, we just had an agreement on this. What are the details?
Absolutely. EU ministers gathered here in Brussels have given their political blessing to unlock the next round of financial support for military aid for Ukraine under what's called the European Peace Facility. That is not the final sign-off. It doesn't mean that any weapons will now be directly sent due to that, but it does mean there will be the political next steps moving forward. And as you said, this is already there's already been a number of decisions to this effect taken since the invasion around 1 year ago. Now, of course, that is something which I think will be music to the ears of officials in Kyiv who have been calling out for more military aid. But what still remains to be seen, as you alluded to, is whether and when Berlin will agree to send its Leopard 2s. Those are main battle tanks, Western-made main battle tanks, which Ukraine has been calling out for. Now, Poland is one of the countries which has been piling political pressure on Germany to agree to greenlight the export of these tanks, and on the other hand to send some of its own. Poland's Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki has been speaking to press. Take a listen to what he had to say.
We will apply for such consent, but this is a secondary topic. Even if we do not get this consent in the end as part of a small coalition, even if the Germans would not be in this coalition, we will still hand over our tanks together with others to Ukraine. The condition for us at the moment is to build at least a small coalition of states.
So, Rosie, talk of a breakaway coalition then to send these tanks to Ukraine. What could that mean for the wider NATO support for the country?
So what Poland is basically saying there is whether or not Berlin gives its green light for the re-export, and that's because Germany has, in theory, the final say on whether these Leopard 2 tanks can be sent on from countries which have them. Well, Poland is saying that it will go ahead whether or not Germany says yes. Now, I'm expecting we might get some news on this tomorrow, Tuesday, because a press conference with NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg and Germany's defence minister has just been announced. That might be the moment we get some movement, and Germany's foreign minister has previously said she would not stand in the way of any such request from Poland. But important to note that if there were such a kind of breakaway coalition, as you said, this is not likely something that would fundamentally change the response so far from NATO, and that is because that Western military alliance doesn't itself send any weapons to Ukraine. It's very much down to the individual NATO allies, the individual NATO members, as to when they send weapons, which weapons they send, where does it go to, and that's really coordinated very much with Ukrainian officials on a country-by-country basis. So while this is something which does show is a sign of some sort of political division, because we've had a very kind of public standoff here with many countries, or certainly those Baltic countries and Poland, quite publicly criticising Germany for what they see as hesitation to send these main battle tanks. It's not likely to change the fundamental picture of how NATO responds to this ongoing conflict.
Rosie, thank you very much for that. Our correspondent Rosie Burchard in Brussels.
Moscow has expelled the Estonian ambassador to Russia, claiming that relations between the two countries have been, quote, destroyed. Earlier this month, Estonia ordered Russia to halve the number of diplomats working at its embassy in Tallinn. Let's head over to Moscow now, and our correspondent Stuart Smith. Stuart, the Kremlin has used some pretty strong language over this. What's been said?
Yeah, which is odd, because on the face of it, this is all about staffing. It's a staffing dispute with Estonia wanting fewer of its diplomats in Russia, and similarly Russia pushing for more in Tallinn. And so initially Estonia was trying to match the number of diplomats at its embassy in Russia. That meant a decrease for the Russian embassy to keep it equivalent, and that's annoyed Russia to the extent it's now expelled the Estonian ambassador. In solidarity with that, Latvia has also expelled its ambassador, the Russian ambassador from Latvia. But the broader reasoning, according to the statement from the Russian Foreign Ministry, seems to be much greater. It says that in recent years, the Estonian leadership has purposefully destroyed the entire range of relations with Russia. It said that hostility towards Russia has been elevated to the rank of state policy. And indeed, Estonia is taking steps to support Ukraine that have angered Russia, and it's made public statements about how this sees Estonia's actions as one of the leading countries delivering weapons to Ukraine as part of a broader problem. Estonia is, by GDP, for its own size, one of the biggest donors of weapons to Ukraine. It's also leading the charge within the European Union to take frozen Russian assets and use them to send to Ukraine to help rebuild its infrastructure, a policy Russia is referring to as robbery. So much bigger issues at stake between Estonia and Russia, but now both Latvia and Estonia brought into line with Lithuania, which last year expelled its Russian ambassador as well. So now all three Baltic nations on the same level, dealing with Russia at their charge d'affaires level, the second highest rank in the embassies.
Meanwhile, Stuart, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is in South Africa. What does he want to get from that trip?
Yeah, so in terms of public statements from Moscow, we've heard that he's interested in discussing BRICS Corporation. That's the grouping of countries that includes South Africa and Russia. And this year it's being held in Pretoria, the Leaders' Summit. So for Russia, it's important to get its concerns and its initiatives as high up in terms of preference as possible. In terms of what South Africa might want from this trip, it's talked about wanting more students from South Africa to study in Russia and also increasing scientific cooperation with Russia. But the focus by the press, especially in Russia too, is on what this means for South Africa-Russia relations. Because officially South Africa says it's neutral, but it's also hosting military drills with China and Russia off the coast of South Africa next month. Pretoria says it used to want Russia to unilaterally leave Ukraine, but that policy has changed with the weapons deliveries to Ukraine. It still considers Russia a friend and says that this kind of cooperation is what friends do.
OK, Stuart, thank you for that update. Stuart Smith in Moscow.
For the first time, a Chinese-made film is being released in China and the UK on the same day.
That's right. The Wandering Earth 2 has just had its preview here in London. Filmmakers hope it will be as successful as the original, which was the 5th highest grossing film for China and for a non-English film. Our correspondent Lu Chunyang reports.
The Wandering Earth has finally reached the UK on Chinese New Year's Day. After a 4-year wait since the Earth first escaped from the solar system, viewers have come back to join the heroes on the rescue mission to save human civilization from the explosion of the sun as it approaches the end of its life cycle. The first film in the series made a splash around the world in 2019, with the 5th biggest gross revenue ever for a non-English language film. The pre-sale box office takings of The Wandering Earth 2 exceeded $14.75 million in China in just one day, adding to the financial success of the blockbuster.
2078, the solar helium flash crisis.
Critics say the trend started by the film could give another boost to thriving Chinese sci-fi.
In this film, in this whole idea of united Earth government, there's all the different countries, right? So there is this rhetoric, this effort in the film to signify a united Earth and not just China and Russia or something like that.
Just as in the story, where intergovernmental experts cooperate to design an alternative power system for the Earth, the production of the film also relies on teamwork among many countries.
People like Jingge Wu Jing was amazing. He really helped me. He coached me, he taught me. I learned a lot of things in Chinese, which was 三人行必有我师. And I really believe the director Guo Fan Daoyan and Jingge Wu Jing were great. They really made me feel like a family.
And it's been a sprint to make sure that we can get it in cinemas at the same time as it is released in China, which I understand is very important here for the Sino language audience.
It is not only the special effects that impress the audience. Whether or not to abandon the Earth after the swelling of the sun also gives them something to think about.
A lot of science fiction that I've watched in the past, they're big in scale, but emotion-wise, they're huge, Like, you feel the story, but it isn't high on emotion. But this, they have managed to keep the drama and the emotions at a high, but at the same time, the science fiction element is not lost.
I really enjoyed it. It was visually very beautiful and impressive. So I watched the previous one and I was curious to see what this one was about.
Fans across the world can now restart their shared adventure through space. Together, wanderers will always find hope at home, wherever that is. Liu Chunyang, CGTN, London.
The global box office is getting back on its feet after COVID. And although overall figures are still down compared with 2019, there were some huge blockbusters released in 2022. And movie insiders say that the top-performing movies of the year show that fans are ready to return for the right films. Despite strict lockdowns across China for most of last year, 2 Chinese-produced films were among the year's top 10 highest-grossing box office hits. Moon Man came in at number 10, taking just over $460 million from the Chinese domestic market. The sci-fi comedy follows the adventures of a taikonaut stranded on the moon after an object collides with Earth. And the sequel to The Battle at Lake Changjin was the 9th highest grossing film for the year, again from the Chinese domestic market alone. The original is the highest grossing Chinese film of all time, and its follow-up did very well too, earning $626 million at the box office. Also known as Watergate Bridge, the movie is a fictionalised retelling of a battle against American forces during the Korean War. So, which film came out top in 2022? Well, that honour goes to Avatar: The Way of Water. Despite only being released on December the 16th, the James Cameron-directed film earned more than $1.6 billion worldwide before the end of the year. The film continues to perform well and today surpassed $2 billion in global ticket sales, becoming just the 6th film to do so in history.
Dad, I know you think I'm crazy. But I feel her.
The sequel is set 15 years after the original, and like before, the Avatar people are defending their world against colonizers. And I've been speaking to Retta Guet, she's head of programme and industry at the Zurich Film Festival, and I asked her whether cinema is back.
We definitely believe so. As speaking from a festival that had been taking place last autumn, we had a record numbers of audience coming back to cinemas. So we think that's a great sign of how the industry starts to recover.
And why do you think people are coming back? Obviously, streaming became huge during the pandemic, but why do people still want to go to the cinema?
Well, I do think it has a lot to do with this joint experience that people like to share. And the moment of having a break, of doing 10 things at a time simultaneously, and obviously with presenting films, if possible, with guests. And that is a very important part of normal cinema experience, but especially for film festivals.
So we've seen something of a recovery so far in cinema. What's your outlook for the rest of this year? Do you think we will see cinema back to its best?
Well, what we see is that there's definitely a hunger of going to the cinemas, but a lot of cinemas had been in huge financial troubles, obviously, the last 2 years. So the market there will be maybe less screens, but still, we actually believe that people will go back. But the cinema facilities itself, they have suffered a lot.
Well, today marks the second day of the Chinese New Year, also known as Kaiyan in Chinese, meaning opening of the new year. It's traditional on this day for married daughters to visit their parents' homes with their husbands, bringing gifts and red envelopes containing money. People also visit temples and fairs to offer sacrifices to the god of wealth, wishing for a more prosperous year. And to mark the Year of the Rabbit, CGTN Europe has been collecting stories from all across Europe. So to learn about the rabbit who lives on the moon or the winged rabbit of Bavaria, visit europe.cgtn.com or our Facebook page.
Our main stories again. A multi-million-dollar support package for Chinese-owned British steel, but only to fund a transition to a greener future.
And rivaling the US dollar, Brazil's President Lula is holding talks with his counterpart in Argentina about a new Latin American currency to take on the US currency. Live pictures here for you from Buenos Aires.
And motive for a massacre. Police in California identify the gunman behind the Lunar New Year mass shooting, but say they don't yet know why he did it.
And that's all for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, goodbye.
Bye-bye.